afternoon, everybody. How are you all doing? A warm welcome and a namaste to all of you. My name is Sundar Rajan, and I'm here to talk to you or even take you back on a journey into a civilization that has been sustaining itself for thousands of years, into antiquity. So, Indologists have put a date to it, but the emic view of it, which is the cultural view of it, doesn't have a date to it. And we'll see what India represents from an Indian or an Indic point of view. Could you go to the next slide, please? So, the next slide, please. So the expectations so far for people looking through external lenses would have been India is a third world or a poor country that is more famous for its call center recently, but tourism and Taj Mahal and others. But we'll also take a look at an ancient India slowly to see that even 300 years ago, India was the richest country in the world with GDP. And it was also the forefront and the forerunner in mathematics, science, philosophy, and religion and aspects, and also trade and commerce, philosophy, and education. Next slide, please. So the story starts with a person called Angus Maddison. He is a macroeconomist who created or who did a study of 2,000 years of world economy and showed that for the first 1,700 years, India was in the top with about 37% of the world economy, coming down around 1750 to about 17% of the world economy. And during this time, there had been certain pillages and plundering, but what happened in 1750 was due to colonialism, there was a huge transition in the education system and the Indic industry system. So that's what happened to collapse the economy. And now slowly, India is again re-emerging back. Next slide, please. But how did India amass that kind of a world economy? If you go back, it'll be interesting to see that the seafarers and traders of India had their reach all the way from East Asia, from Java and Sumatra to the west, where Rome and Spain and Portugal, Spain more, had markets from India, traders going there. So Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or the Gulf countries, all of Iran and Mesopotamia were filled with Indian goods that went textiles, precious gem, and all that went there. I can even go into details of how some of the Viking swords and the long swords were made of wood steel, which was made in India, in South India specifically. Next slide, please. So along with the trade and economy, I'll just go quickly, came a transition of cultural transference between India and other regions. So we'll go back to how old India is. There's a place in Madhya Pradesh in India called the Bhimbetka Caves. And some of the cave paintings there go way back into hundreds of thousands of years old, and the cave itself is 100,000 years old. In that 100,000 years, you can also see that the usage of horses and hunting was prevalent, and it was a culture that thrived indigenously. And slowly there was transition that happened from the indigenous culture to a more modern society. Next slide, please. The Indus Valley civilization, which initially was thought to be about 5,500 BC, now goes up to 7,000 BC, which is about 8,000 years old. And in this time, next slide, you'll see that there are modern sewers, underground sewers, double-story buildings that were found in the Indus Valley civilization. Going forward, next slide, you can also see ports that were really well constructed. This is like 5,000 to 6,000 years old, this is a Lothal port in modern Gujarat, where ships used to come, there used to be granaries, and local marketing trade used to take place, all this 6,000 years ago. So even while I was growing up, I wasn't taught all this in schools. We were taught that Egyptian civilization, or the Byzantine or the Roman, were old. But now modern Indology and with the advent of internet, accessibility to information is much more prevalent. All these you can Google up, and you will see that these have records and also multiple discussions on how the information was sourced. Next slide, please. Now the question is, I'm telling you all about the greatness of old India, but how is it relevant to today's day and age? Okay, you are great, but what's in it for me is the question I'm asking you, right? So going forward, next slide please. So we live in a modern world where we cherish a lot of values like promoting cultural diversity. We live in a multi-faith world where respect and inclusivity drives how we think. And we also embrace diversity and celebrate gender equality and more, gender equity. We talk about gender non-conformation. We talk about cherishing and preserving natural resources and global warming and such. The consciousness is slowly driven towards not me, but us. We're talking about raising awareness for animal rights and discrimination or against discrimination based on skin tone. Great. But I'll also again take you back from modern values back to India. Next slide please. So speaking of multiculturalism, India is an amazingly multicultural country. And the people you see here, you would easily group them as Indians, but we know within each other there were different languages, different customs, traditions. So if you go to the next slide, you'll be surprised to know that the surviving, this is more modern rather than 100, 200 years ago. There are 121 languages, not dialects, languages that are spoken by more than 10,000 people or more. And more than 19,500 dialects which are classified as mother tongues by people. And 66 different scripts. So if I speak in my mother tongue, many of my own countrymen here would fail to understand me. Because the grammar is different, the linguistics is different, the music, cuisine, art, everything is so diverse that every 50 kilometers in India you'll suddenly start seeing a change in the way people act, dress, dance, sing. It's all different. Go to the next slide. So this is just an example of a few different types of the way we dress, and it's very even though it's superficial, you can actually see in a very quick glance. Even a sari is not the same from Gujarat to South India to Assam to Uttar Pradesh, right? So it's worn differently. People celebrate each festival, and I joke around saying India has more than 400 New Year every year. Because we celebrate on different days, lunar calendar, solar calendar, south, north, east, right? And the diversity is amazingly different, but what brings people together is this idea of unity in diversity. Next slide, please. You can look, even the features are different. One, you'll see a very Mongoloid or a very northeast India is very close to more the Tibetan or the Chinese facial features. Whereas in the south, you'll see a much more on the top right corner, you have a tribal girl from southern India, right? And this strikes even more on the next slide, if you go to the next slide, as the one on the right is an island or series of islands called the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, where there are primitive tribes that do not want to be included in the mainstream. They're still in the age where they don't want fire. So basically they're living as their ancestors lived thousands or 10,000 years ago. So the Jarawa tribe, and that's definitely very Indian. And on this side, there are also tribals. They are called the Gandhi tribals of Himachal Pradesh. You can see the features have nothing to do one with the other. Still, it's a country that breathes and thinks of itself as one unique, contiguous fabric. Next slide, please. This is, everybody knows it's Holi. So Holi is basically one of the many interesting festivals that are celebrated pan-India, right? And we celebrate it here too. So here you don't see the skin color, you don't see the religion, caste, creed, anything. It's people versus people, and we are one and the same. Slide again, because I have a short duration, I'm just rushing through it. Any questions at any time, however uncomfortable, just throw it at me later. Yeah. So speaking about women empowerment and matriarchy, culturally, we are ingrained in our DNA to not see just the feminine side as subservient to a patriarchal society. We have matriarchal societies where property is transferred from mother to daughter rather than from father to son. And we also have our deities representing knowledge, wealth, and strength as Lakshmi, Parvati, and Saraswati Mata. We always call them as Mata. Going one step forward to the next slide. So, Veda mantras, which is the core of Hinduism, the Vedas, have been composed by men and women, the Rishikas. There were women teachers, women students, co-education existed till around the medieval time when women were not allowed to study for political reasons than ideological ones. There were women soldiers and bodyguards mentioned in Arthashastra. Governments had employed so many women in as part of their workforce. And independent women rulers were not very uncommon. And even the Ramayana says at one point, I'll go into it much later, that when Rama was going to, one of the princes was going to the forest, technically his wife could become the queen if she chose to. Okay, next slide please. And this is gender equality represented in the most amazing way in any civilization. So that the first slide is called Ardhanarishwara, where the god is man and woman, or masculine and feminine in equal parts. There is no inequality in it. So we see nature as a beautiful interplay of the masculine and the feminine, rather than one being the subservient or the other, or one dominating the other. Unfortunately, today's world, if things are topsy-turvy, it's not because of the religion, it's in spite of the religion. And that's the difference. And the one on the side, next one, which is going to be very go back. So the one on the right, you can see Mother Goddess Lalita Parameshwari on the top, and you see all the male gods of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and Maheshwara, and Sadashiva at the bottom, right? So it's a very iconography that actually goes into deep philosophy. I can actually go into volumes on that, but time doesn't permit me for that. But I'm just saying that the topmost god is a goddess, Lalita Parameshwari. Keep going next. Speaking of eco-responsibility, there is so much ingrained in the Indian culture and psyche that we respect nature like no other. And I don't want to make it as a boast, it's just that what we were made fun of is actually eco-responsibility. The next slide, you'll see Indians worshipping trees and plants and herbs because they are the one that sustain you. This is an attitude of gratitude towards nature. The more you worship it, the less you cut it. The more you worship or the more you appreciate, less deforestation happens. Next, it's not just up to trees, rivers, rivers, the earth, fire, everything is worshipped. The nature in itself, inanimate objects of worship. Go next. Same thing with cow. So many people ask you, why is a cow holy to you? I would say it's not just the cow, the cobra is holy as well. It's every other animal is holy. It's not just cow. Okay, so, but we give our gratitude back to what is called the Buddhas. Next slide please. Yeah, and it extends to the planet and cosmos as well, connecting ourselves with the universe. When I look at this room, I'm not an individual here. I'm fully connected with all of you. You are my own. So when you have that attitude, there is no enmity. You can run an extremely large country without having feuds, because at the end of the day, we are kins and siblings. Next slide. I'll end this with a shloka. And the shloka talks about just what I mentioned, the entire universe, peace upon the entire universe. Om Dhyau Shanti Rantarikshagam Shanti Prathave Shanti Rata Shanti Roshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishve Deva Shanti Sa Brahma Shanti. So this is peace upon the cosmos, peace in space, on earth, the waters, plants, trees, gods, and Brahma, which is Vedas and the absolute Brahman of the infinite consciousness. So with this, I yield the floor back, and there will be different aspects of the Indic culture that will be on display. But any questions, any times, please don't be shy. There is no wrong question. and we're all here to actually interact and learn from each other. Thank you, and over to you.